number one, when people think of who represents space, they think of these 3 billionaires, and that is not representative of the industry. Number two, when they think of space, they just think about space tourism and launching rockets. And again, that is not representative of the industry. And then when they think of space, they think, well, how does it affect me? It's so abstract.
Welcome back, Space Watchers, to another episode of Space Café Radio. I'm Emma Gatti, Senior Editor of SpaceWatch.Global and Space Café host. Today's episode is part of a joint collaboration between SpaceWatch.Global and Secure World Foundation, focused on creating a new communication language, strategies, and outreach environment for the space domain at large. For more information about this initiative and the goals of the Space Communication Project, please contact Crystal Hazelton of Secure World Foundation or myself. Our guest today is Farzana Baduel, the CEO of Curzon PR, a London-based PR firm focused on public relations and marketing communications consultancy. Farzana served as Vice Chair of Business Relations for the UK Conservative Party, so I was very curious to hear her opinion regarding the possible strategies that the space domain could use to implement its communication campaigns. Had a chat with her during the 4th Secure World Foundation Sustainability Summit held in London, and I picked her brain. So listen up. Also, please note that the audio was recorded in a room with a big echo. We removed it, but in few spots the quality of the audio has been slightly affected by our post-processing work to keep the echo at bay. We apologize for that, but obviously the quality of the content remains, and this is the nice and lively things of running these interviews live on conferences, on the road. So please don't be discouraged and keep listening. Farzana, thanks a lot for being here with us today. It's a pleasure to meet you. How are you?
Very well, and thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you. So let's start with something about communication. What do you think is the main issue with space communication from a PR perspective?
If you look at the space as an industry, and because of its military history, there is an aspect of some lack of transparency. And in the age that we live in, people expect industries to have consumer-grade communications. And so the expectation in society is stakeholder engagement on all levels. And what we see with the space industry is that there isn't much engagement with various different stakeholders. And in particular, what you see a lot of young children are very excited about the idea of space, but actually they're not particularly choosing their careers to go into the space industry because they're not quite sure what the mission of the industry is. There's also the other issue that we have in the industry is that it's dominated by these big billionaire types. So we've got Elon Musk, we've got Richard Branson, we've got Bezos. And so when people look at space and the media that they consume about space tends to be distorted by these three icons. And often it leads to a sense of exclusivity, and it leads to a sense of, well, it's not for us. And they also feel, well, why shouldn't we put our sort of life energy into building a career in the space industry for what? For glorifying space tourism for these billionaires because they can. And of course, perception and reality is not the same thing. There is much more to the space industry than just space tourism and these three figures. What we have a disconnect between the industry and the public not quite aware of the impact that space has on their day-to-day lives, carrying around their smartphones, being able to use data, being able to navigate using Google Maps. They just aren't aware to the extent of how space has contributed to their daily lives, and therein lies the disconnect.
So what do you think is the PR contribution? How a sector like yours can help or can contribute to actually create this kind of like larger, broader engagement?
But when you look at the space, it is so encompassing of all stakeholders in society because it affects everybody's daily lives. And what really one needs to do with space communication is to bring in the storytellers. And the storytellers, you will not just find them within the industry. And it's best to engage storytellers from outside the industry because the best way to communicate to people outside of the industry is by using people as message carriers from outside the industry to be able to bring the external perspective, look at the space industry and really pick out the key stories that they can take. So for instance, at the conference here, I met this incredible gentleman who is a very talented photographer And he has created this wonderful photographic exhibition that's going to travel around the world about space debris. And he's going to use visual arts as a way to engage with people. And of course, there's going to be educational programming at the back of it. He's going to engage with schools as well as the media and so forth. And so he's using art as a way to bring the story to people that would normally not gravitate towards the industry, but they would gravitate towards other sectors such as arts and culture. Another area, for instance, is, you have a lot of science fiction. Where are all of the documentaries that aren't just focused upon launch, but all the other fascinating aspects of space? So the other issue with space is, number one, when people think of who represents space, they think of these 3 billionaires, and that is not representative of the industry. Number two, when they think of space, they just think about space tourism and launching rockets. And again, that is not representative of the industry. And then when they think of space, they think, well, how does it affect me? It's so abstract. And they don't understand that all of the satellites around the world not only impacts their day and allows them to use their smartphones, but it also has huge potential to bring data through the constellation of satellites around the world and all the different data sensors that are being created to bring a higher level of data that can really impact so many different industries, from agriculture to others, and increase yields and so forth in ways that we can't even imagine today. And that level of potential has yet to be understood by the public. And for me, I find it a fascinating industry, a very welcoming industry, but the perception around the industry gets a closed shop.
What you're saying is that maybe we should try to move the focus from a person-based focus, like trying to just detail the hero, to a more message and knowledge-based focus, like just to enlarge.
Ideally, what you'd want is a combination. What you'd want to do is create stories that appeal to the rational mind. So that would really be educating them that space is broader than space tourism and launch. It's a wider industry that has multiple players other than just these billionaires. Then you need to also approach these sort of emotional storytelling. And that's where you have the vision, the potential, the dreams of the space industry, of all the different nascent technologies and the spin-off technologies and the potential, and really use that to excite the public and whet the appetite of what could be possible. Because there is no other industry that exists that has this sort of exploratory dimension, that human curiosity. So I think the space industry is in a very clear position that it has the potential to really whet the appetite and excite the public. And that excitement isn't coming through. And the way to sort of work on that is that's where the culture platforms come in. And also to be very aware of not using heavy jargon. And so even for companies and organizations operating in the space industry, is to understand that it is a growing industry, which means there'll be a lot of new people coming into the industry, which means it's probably quite a good idea to use plain language when discussing the different technologies within space so that people understand. So for instance, one of our clients create sort of cameras and satellites. And so part of our sort of brand workshop with them is let's not just necessarily talk about the hardware components, let's also talk about the application and how it impacts. And so that's where a lot of people also want to know, well, how does it affect us? I think the final bucket of messaging is to confront the harsh truths. And the naysayers. There are people out there that say, why spend money on space when we have problems here in the world, such as climate change? And that's where we've got to be much more impactful with storytelling, and we need to be transparent and say, well, actually, this is the environmental impact of our activities today. This is what we're going to do in terms of trying to mitigate that and reduce that. And here is potential of how we can use space technologies and the spin-off technologies in order to deal with the existential threats that are facing humanity, such as climate change. So there's really buckets of messaging that goes from emotive to rational to confronting the criticisms head-on with transparency and with data and with sincerity.
It's true that we have in space an exploratory dimension, a dreamy dimension, and what attracts the kids. But it's also true that we do have a more critical dimension, like space is also the domain of warfare, of military operations, of war. My opinion is that in the era that we are living right now, in this overload of information and misinformation, let's take a look at what happened with COVID, for example. It is critical that the industry at large take up also the critical parts, the transparency, the communication of what we're doing, how we're doing, trying with the bottom-up approach, like discussing openly the limits, for example, that we might have, the potential hazards, because otherwise all the parts that don't get communicated they become a kind of backhand, they become suspicious because we live in this type of overloading of information era. So I agree with you about the dream dimension. However, I feel that as a communicators, the industry also needs a bit of more grounding and exploring the projects, as you say, transparently and explaining better how we're going to resolve the challenges of our planet.
I think you're absolutely right, because one challenge is really for the space industries in each country to connect with their public and bring them with them on the journey. But the second most difficult challenge is actually the diplomatic challenge, where space will only be possible and conflict-free if there is international cooperation. And there are geopolitical tensions, and there are countries who are really monitoring the messaging coming out of the countries and the industries and the influences in the industry. It needs to be highly strategic, and it's not just about bringing the public, but it's also about being aware of the other countries and their perceptions. And especially when you've got some big players, big country players in the space industry, other countries are thinking, well, what will be our stake? And will it be inclusive to us? Or will it just be for the big players? And are we going to miss out on this huge opportunity because the international governance framework isn't robust enough to protect the interests of the smaller countries? There could be a sense of being left behind. And what we really need to do is to, number one, bring the public in our own countries and get them behind the space industry. But number two, the biggest challenge will be the international cooperation, which would be the tensions, will be huge suspicion on other countries, will be the economic aspect to any discovery and how that will impact countries' interests. So that is actually the most delicate of communication, where culture plays a lead role, and also the lack of clout between a major player in the space industry like the US and other countries that have yet to develop their space industry.
So how do you think the media can help to create this global, neutral atmosphere in which different countries can meet and peacefully collaborate instead of fighting?
Well, I think what tends to happen is scientists, engineers around the world tend to be quite good about cooperating with each other. The issue is the public affairs element, is when it goes into political domain. And so really there needs to be a strong sense of public affairs in understanding the potential for conflict and the potential for misinformation and disinformation, and to be able to really proactively control the messaging that's coming out from national space agencies. If you look at last year, you had Prince William, who made some comments, quite negative comments about the space industry. He's a very important voice for the UK, and if he is coming up with these comments, it means that there isn't sufficient engagement with the key influencers in the establishment for them to understand that there is actually huge potential and positivity in the industry. And it was quite interesting is yesterday at the conference we had, His Royal Highness Prince Charles, very much supporting the industry, but his son last year made those comments. And so what you see is you've got a bit of cognitive dissonance happening. And the reason why is what's underlying is there needs to be a strategic, concerted effort to ensure that politicians and establishment figures who have the power to really have a ripple effect on their messages are engaged and they understand. I've got a number of people that I know who are working in the House of Commons and the House of Lords, and of course there are a few on the all-parliamentary group that obviously understand about space and potential, but there is a wide range of politicians that have yet to actually be engaged with and to understand, also to bring in those politicians that don't necessarily have the science and engineering background. And I think that is key, because when you look at a lot of the establishment figures, the ones who tend to gravitate around space are the ones with a relevant background within there. But I think the key would actually be bringing in people with diverse backgrounds. And that diverse background will really enable these message carriers to go deep into society and carry the message that space is inclusive and it's for all.
But let's try to make it happen. It's in our hands, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I have great optimism, because from the conference today, there was a lot of positive discussions around it. I think people know there's an issue, and it's really about finding the best way to really communicate the story of space, which is incredibly inspiring.
To tackle it. Thanks a lot, Farzana, for your help, for your interesting opinion. I hope we will have the chance to discuss this matter again.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Emma.
Thank you for listening to Space Café Radio on tour in London. This episode is part of a joint collaboration between SpaceWatch.Global and Secure World Foundation, focused on creating a new communication language, strategies, and outreach environment for the space domain at large. If you want to keep the pulse of the space industry, please visit our website at www.SpaceWatch.Global and subscribe to our newsletters. And of course, don't forget to become a Space Watcher. I'm Emma Gatti, Senior Editor at SpaceWatch.Global, your independent perspective on space. See you next time. Ciao.